Our first speaker on this topic is Dr. Russell Saneto. He is a pediatric neurologist in Seattle, Washington, who specializes in diagnosis and treatment of epilepsy, neurogenic disorders, and neurometabolic disorders, particularly mitochondrial disease. He is actively involved in the Mitochondrial Medicine Society, serving as the president, secretary, and treasurer, as well as on the Mitochondrial Medicine Society's Committee on Diagnosis. Dr. Saneto is the principal investigator for the NIH Natural History Study of Mitochondrial Diseases at Seattle Children's Hospital. A longtime favorite physician of the mitochondrial disease patients, Dr. Saneto's philosophy is that he not only treats the child, but the whole family, because when the child gets sick, the whole family suffers. Thank you.
Oops. Story of my life, nothing works. So, thank you very much for the introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I hope I don't bore anybody to death. I was going to bring samples, but it's a federal offense to fly in cannabis. So, sorry I couldn't bring it in. But I did send a shout out to Charlotte's Web, but they decided they didn't want to send either. No, I'm just kidding. So, some disclosures. So, I'm on the advisory board for GW Pharmaceuticals, and that's the company that's trying to bring purified CBD to market for epilepsy. I'm also a PI on 2 other studies, and I'm on the advisory board for biotherapeutics, although they do not pay me. I'm just the advisor. All the money that honorariums go to my hospital, which they thank you for letting me do that stuff. So what do we actually know about cannabis and CBD and THC and THCA and CBD? So there is the physicians on your right who know virtually nothing. And then there are the growers that know an awful lot on your left. And then stuck in the middle are our patients. So that's Charlotte Figge. She was a poster child for CNN who was put on CBD and her seizures got way better. So just some ground rules here. Cannabis is not marijuana. So cannabis is the plant. Marijuana is one of the cannabidiols in the plant. And you need to know that because their mechanisms of action are completely different. So THC acts through the CB1 and CB2 receptor. We now know that CBD, or cannabidiol, acts at the GABA receptor. So the reason why it works in Dravet syndrome is because it enhances the GABA receptor in the small interneuron GABA neurons and enhances their activity, and therefore brings back the balance between excitatory and inhibitory. 2 distinct mechanisms. In fact, if you put CBD... Could you have the mic before I... So if you put CBD in the same petri dish as THC, CBD will actually down-regulate CB1 receptor activity. For those of you who are adding THCA into your cocktails because you think it's helping your kid and you're giving them CBD for its effect, you're not doing it. In fact, you're doing the opposite. In fact, what you're doing is you're habituating the THC effect and you will lose efficacy. I see that in my patient population all the time. We just wrote a paper that was published looking at our patient population who did not qualify for the CBD trial, who take artisan extracts in trying to control their epilepsy and their other problems. So, unfortunately, I deal with this all the time. And they don't believe me because I'm a doctor. So, what do we have good medical evidence for? And this is a recent report by the National Academy of Sciences. So there are 3 basic areas. The treatment of chronic pain in adults, which is where it got its heralded benefit for cancer. It keeps you from... Gosh. I don't know if I'm coordinated to walk, talk, and push a button at the same time. It also helps for chemotherapy, nausea, vomiting, for sure. And it improves spasticity in multiple sclerosis. Those are evidence-based good things that extracts do for patients, documented. So, not double-blinded, but at least well-controlled trials that give you the benefit. Okay? Now, in epilepsy, I don't know how many folks here have a son or a daughter, or they themselves have epilepsy, but it's a terrible disorder. And the reason why we think that patients get epilepsy is because there's this imbalance between the neurons that excite the brain and the neurons that keep the excitatory process from overreacting, the inhibitory part. And so those two need to be in balance. If they're not in balance, guess what? You usually get seizures. You get also things like dementia, neurodegeneration. But mostly we're dealing with epilepsy here. So here's the phase 1-2 trial of the GW pharmaceutical study looking at Dravet syndrome. And if you look, some background. In Dravet syndrome, kids starting at about age 1 to 2 start having seizures. And they have dozens and dozens and dozens of seizures per day. And we have medications that can slow it down, but we don't have any treatments to make kids and adults who have this disorder seizure-free. It's a big burden on the family, it's a big burden on the child, it's a big burden on the medical system. So, Charlotte Figge was right, CNN was right. CBD extracts do slow down seizures. We know that. And this company is going to be taking to the FDA their results from the Lennox-Gastaut trial and now the part 1 of the Dravet syndrome trial. We're getting ready to start it on tuberous sclerosis next month because it will help solve some of the epilepsy problems because it acts by a novel mechanism. It acts on the GABA receptor where the other GABA drugs that we know of do not act. So it's got a novel mode of action, which is what we need in epilepsy, what we need in other diseases. So, Lennox-Gastaut trial I just told you about. The trial was big. You can see there's 225 kids who had TS. It was divided into the usual double-blinded placebo-controlled trial. So 1/3 got placebo, 1/3 got a low dose, 1/3 got a high dose. This is a syndrome very much like Dravet syndrome. It's terrible epilepsy. We have nothing that really works well. Our drugs can slow it down, but our drugs have a bazillion side effects, so they're problematic. But there was 37% reduction in the worst type of seizure in Lennox-Gastaut, the drop seizures. That's what cracks teeth. That's what causes problems with chin lacerations. It's a big problem. This drug, CBD, reduced it by 37%. And the high dose arm was even better, so it's still responsive. We don't know the high dose. Well, I do, because I did levels. So just for an example, artisan CBD that you get off the street, Haley's Hope, which is probably the best product if you live in Washington State, or TJ Organics, I know them all, my friends. And their levels are in the 20s and 30s. In the GW pharmaceutical trial, the doses needed to stop seizures started at about 180. You need 10 times the amount that you're giving your child if you're using Charlotte's Web. 10 times. Multiply $200 times 10 per month, and you get what you're going to need if you have one of these diseases to control seizures adequately. Now, my friend Dustin in Maine says that you can get by with lower doses. The trials never looked at really low doses. We got to go back and revisit that data. So, Dravet syndrome. This was just published in May of this year. Again, Dravet syndrome is caused by an SCN1A gene mutation. It's a terrible disorder. Seizures start at the age of 1, and that's it for the rest of your life. You're going to have dozens of seizures. You have a 20-fold chance of dying in the middle of sleep by SUDEP, mechanism we don't understand. Uncontrolled seizures, none of the drugs work. Look at this, 43% of patients had a 50% reduction in seizures. That's phenomenal in my role of trying to control Dravet syndrome. So, theoretical risks for using THC in mitochondrial disease. Let me give you a quick example. I know my time's limited. I took care of a former Mariners baseball player. You would know his name if I mentioned it. He was a utility player. He did well. He could play multiple positions. He hit about 240 a year. Not great, but he stayed in the bigs. He started smoking a lot of marijuana. And he came to me because he was a heterozygous for thalassemia gene. And he thought that was the big deal, contributing to his hitting 188 from the Mariners. So we did some testing, and he didn't tell me at the time, but he was definitely muscularly weak. And we couldn't figure it out. So eventually it came out that he was a very chronic smoker of marijuana. What we know in mice is that CB1 receptors are found on the outer membrane of mitochondria, large amounts. When activated, it downregulates complex 1 activity. So I told him, listen, just don't smoke as much and see what happens to your batting average. Unfortunately, he was cut by the Mariners, latched on to a team this year, and actually he's doing pretty well. So he's back again batting in the 240s. He smokes a lot less marijuana. Cause and effect, who knows? But that was my thought with him. Now, so there is data showing that in rats and mice that you can get changes in complex 1. But with CBD, if you look, you get increased activities of the electron transport chain. Pretty amazing. How? We really don't know yet. But it's very interesting. We think it has something to do with calcium, but clearly we don't know enough yet. Theoretically, the reason why we think it works in epilepsy is because we think that in complex 1 and complex 4 disease, you get reduction in the interneuron that's GABA positive, meaning that it GABA enhances. So you get downregulation of the interneuron, you get less GABA, less inhibitory effects, and so the excitatory system takes over, and now you have epilepsy. So you use GABA drugs, and that brings back up the equilibrium. Remember me showing you that little balance? Well, that's what CBD is doing. CBD increases the GABA interneuron activity. It happens in Dravet, we know for sure. And just the recent data by the Newcastle group suggests that that's maybe what's happening in mitochondrial disease, at least complex 1 and complex 4. So do I think it'd be helpful for seizures in mitochondrial disease? So off the record, yes. I do. So, what's the problem here? The problem is that we have anecdotal evidence without doing the legwork to do the scientific investigation. The cart is before the horse in the insurance. We need to do more research. We have a field because the data is indicating that CBD is going to be really beneficial in medicine. We just need to prove it. The FDA will probably approve CBD for Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut. The application is going to be finished by the company by August, September, and submitted to the FDA. Insider trading, right? They're not public. still, carts before the horse. And I think we need to tread lightly. If you're going to use a product, please use it under supervision and get levels. I can tell you that every one of my patients that uses Charlotte Web has a fairly high level of THC. It's detectable. If you take a smoker and you do the same levels 6 hours after they stop smoking one little, it's no little, one cigarette, their levels are way lower than these kids that are getting chronic dosing extracts that we don't know the purity of. It's one of the problems. So I'll leave you with that, and hopefully I'm within my time.
Okay, next we have Patrick Nightingale. He's a former prosecutor and practicing criminal defense attorney who owns PKN Law, a full-service criminal defense law firm in which he offers experienced and unbiased representation for individuals facing criminal charges. Mr. Nightingale practices regularly before the courts of common pleas throughout Western Pennsylvania, as well as before the United States District Courts for the Western District of Pennsylvania. The scope of Patrick K. Nightingale's experience practice includes any and all pretrial, pre-indictment representation, representation at trial, sentencing, and post-sentencing motions. He has extensive appellate experience before the appellate courts of the Commonwealth of PA and the Third Circuit Court of Appeals.
Well, thank you very much. Oh my God. Yeah, that mic's a little bit live. I'll try to be a little respectful of that and I'll stick it right up in my face. Ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, I'd like to thank you very much for welcoming me. I'm in my capacity as the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Medical Cannabis Society, and we are very actively engaged with implementing our new medical cannabis law in Pennsylvania, which was passed last year. Now we've got growers and processors and dispensaries that have been licensed, and we're working to educate physicians and patients about the potential medical efficacy of marijuana, of cannabis, of THC, of cannabidiol, and of all their derivatives, so that patients, at the very least, have another option to discuss with their treatment provider. You know, unfortunately, in the activist community, you hear marijuana activists talk like marijuana can cure everything. Cannabis cures cancer. Marijuana is the most beneficial drug known to man, or the most beneficial substance known to man. And, you know, by a large degree, some of that is true. You know, we're coming out of, you know, decades of having marijuana demonized as a Schedule I controlled drug with absolutely no medical efficacy, and now we're, you know, here discussing its potential medical efficacy at your annual symposium. But nonetheless, we still have a lot of work to do, but we also have to be honest. And, you know, initially I thought, I'm going after Dr. Saneto. Oh, that's I'm not a medical professional, I'm not a scientist, that's going to be a little difficult. But what I think is beneficial to come after hearing Dr. Saneto talk is that while this plant does have incredible potential, while it does have some proven efficacy, there are still a lot of unknowns. And when it comes to treating it as a medicine for critically ill children, for critically ill patients, unfortunately, the activist community, the grassroots community, has been experimenting with, you know, various products for years and years and years, and we have a lot of anecdotal evidence, but we have that anecdotal evidence that doesn't quite reach that level of scientific and medical certainty that we need. And why is that? A lot of that has to do with marijuana's Schedule I classification. And we're hopeful, as more and more states embrace medical marijuana, that the DEA will finally look in the mirror and recognize that what they've been telling us for 45 years is a bald-faced lie. We have 29 states with a medical cannabis law in the United States of America, yet the DEA maintains as a statement of official policy that marijuana has no medical efficacy whatsoever and a high potential for abuse. That is an irreconcilable conflict between federal law and state law, and given the millions and millions of Americans who now have access to medical cannabis, I think that we're going to be on the victorious side of this, and the DEA at some point in time is going to have to take a renewed look at this and acknowledge that yes, in fact, it has medical efficacy, and whether it should be scheduled or not is one thing, but it most certainly should be moved from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 to open up the type of research that we need in order to, bring these clinical studies to the FDA so that there are more reliable medicines. What I'd like to talk about right now is just a little bit about the history of cannabis as a medicine. A lot of times when I talk to people, they're under the impression that no one has ever used cannabis medically until it was started to be used in California in the 1990s. When in fact cannabis has been used by humans for thousands of years in its medical preparation. The very first use of medical cannabis was documented in China, approximately 29th to 27th century BC, and that most likely was some type of a cannabis extract, perhaps an oil, a tincture, or maybe a hashish. In the Bible, there are references to Cannabosum, and under more modern linguistic interpretations, this is believed to refer to cannabis oil or cannabis resin as opposed to some other type of anointing oil. And in fact, there was a 14-year-old girl who was found to have THC in her system, and the speculation is that perhaps medical cannabis was used in aid of childbirth. Queen Victoria famously used cannabis in the 19th century, and her physician prescribed tincture for menstrual cramps and wrote, "When pure and administered carefully, cannabis is one of the most valuable medicines we possess." That was in the 19th century. Here in the United States, it used to be the law that people had to grow industrial hemp. Hemp and medical marijuana are not exactly the same. The differences between the two, Dr. Saneto was referring to CBD, cannabidiol. CBD is one of the cannabinoids in cannabis sativa L. Cannabis sativa L is what we commonly refer to as marijuana. That's the plant that gets you high. There's also cannabis ruderalis, which is industrial hemp. The difference is cannabis ruderalis does not have THC in it. It has very, very trace amounts of it, but you cannot possibly get a psychoactive effect from cannabis ruderalis. And the CBD products right now that are on the marketplace that are being touted as, quote, legal CBD products are CBD oils that are derived from cannabis ruderalis that are sometimes grown in Canada, sometimes grown in China, sometimes grown in the United States. But to follow up on what Dr. Saneto said, one of the big challenges is if you start to experiment with a CBD oil to know exactly where it is coming from. Because I would have a very hard time recommending to someone whose child is critically ill to buy an industrial hemp-derived product where they don't know the source of the plant material or don't know the extraction processes used. But then, in spite of having a well-documented history of medical efficacy, in the 1930s, there was a concerted effort to demonize marijuana. Believe it or not, there was a congressional testimony from the head of the DEA at the time, a man named Harry Anslinger, who completely played the race card, warning Congress about Mexicans bringing in this psychoactive substance from Mexico, that it makes darkies think that they're the equivalent of the white man. And what they did in the process was eliminate the competition for nylon and eliminate the competition for Hearst's vast timber holdings. So when you look at the history of marijuana prohibition, I can tell you for a fact it is rooted 100% in racism. The American Medical Association, when they found out that Congress was considering imposing a tax on marijuana and that would affect the cannabis extracts that was regularly used by physicians, they opposed it. However, they didn't have much of a voice, and the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act was passed in 1937. However, World War II broke out, and we realized that in making marijuana illegal, it made industrial hemp illegal. So you had this Hemp for Victory program during World War II, where the government was encouraging farmers to plant hemp crops because of the critical need for rope and other hemp-derived materials for the war effort. Now, I'm a drummer, a jazz musician, a rock and roll musician, and this is one of the things that just absolutely amazes me. One of the reasons that Harry Anslinger was so convinced that marijuana was evil, that it was bad for you, is because jazz musicians smoked marijuana, and jazz musicians played too fast, according to Harry Anslinger. So they made sure to prosecute Gene Krupa, one of the early pioneers of double bass jazz drumming, under the Tax Stamp Act, and he was sentenced to 90 days incarceration, having later been cleared from that. In the 20th century, in the later part of the 20th century, President Nixon and Congress were pursuing the Controlled Substances Act. They were going to make all drugs illegal because of the negative effects that it was having on the war effort in Vietnam, and so on and so forth. Nixon's motives have been ascribed to have been widely racist, to have been targeting the anti-war left, whatever the case may be. But when it came to marijuana, no one really knew where to put it. Should it be Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Nixon turned to former Pennsylvania Governor Raymond Schaefer, a Republican stalwart. And Nixon said to Governor Schaefer, we don't know what to do with this. So we need you to conduct a study, to have a commission, and tell us whether or not marijuana, where it should be placed in the Controlled Substances Act. In the meantime, we're just going to temporarily place it in Schedule 1. Governor Schaefer did his job well. He did it too well for President Nixon. Governor Schaefer concluded that the criminal law is too harsh a tool to apply to personal possession, even in the effort to discourage use. It implies an overwhelming indictment of the behavior, which we believe is not appropriate. The actual and potential harm of the use of the drug is not great enough to justify intrusion by the criminal law into private behavior, a step which our society takes only with the greatest reluctance. President Nixon was not amused. He was overheard to say, "You're enough of a pro to know that for you to come out with something like that would run counter to what Congress feels and what the country feels and what we're planning to do would make your commission look bad as hell." And the Schaefer report was buried, and marijuana has been Schedule 1 ever since. So, when you hear the DEA say that marijuana is Schedule 1 because it has no medical efficacy, know that this was the only study conducted by the federal government at the dawn of the war on drugs to determine whether or not marijuana should be a scheduled substance, and basically the conclusion was that personal use of marijuana shouldn't be regulated at all. Early voices of reform included the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. There was some litigation against the DEA, and in fact, in 1988, and again, these are federal agencies that are saying this type of thing. In 1988, administrative law judge concluded that based upon the facts established in this record and set out above, one must reasonably conclude that there is accepted safety for the use of marijuana under medical supervision. To conclude otherwise on this record would be unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious. That was in 1988. In 2017, the DEA reiterated that they believe it's Schedule 1. Something about marijuana that you may or may not know is that its lethality, its LD50 ratio is so low that it would literally require a human being to ingest 1,500 pounds of marijuana in a single day. Some say 1,500 pounds in a 15-minute setting. And otherwise, it is absolutely impossible to overdose from marijuana. And trust me, ladies and gentlemen, a lot of us have tried. And what that means is that in terms of relative toxicity, it is an incredibly safe substance. In Israel, they were doing studies on marijuana for treatment of diabetes, I think early stage diabetes or type 1 diabetes, and they moved straight from some lab testing to human trials because they said, listen, you can't hurt anybody, you can't die from it. So, we feel comfortable moving straight to human trials because of how safe, relatively speaking, this plant is. There has been litigation challenging the DEA. So far, we have not been able to bring a case to the DEA in federal court that allows us to build the record that we have in 2017. The last litigation by Americans for Safe Access versus the Drug Enforcement Agency involved a record as it existed in the year 2000, which did not have the clinical studies that Dr. Saneto referred to, did not have the scientific papers, did not have dozens of medical marijuana states here with the record that we were able to produce from that. The absolute beginning of medical marijuana, and I think I'm just about out of time, but I wanted to let you know, where did this come from? Where did this modern concept of medical marijuana come from? Well, it came from California, and it came in direct response to the AIDS crisis in the 1990s. A woman by the name of Brownie Mary started to make hash brownies and take them to patients in San Francisco hospitals. That led to Proposition 215, which was the country's first medical marijuana law that was passed by ballot initiative in 1996. And what Proposition 215 said is, if you have a condition and you think marijuana could benefit you, it's legal in the state of California. It was not very well regulated. In California, it varies from county to county in how it is enforced and whether or not dispensaries would be available. But that was our first medical marijuana state in 1996. And now here we are in 2017, and we have 29 medical marijuana states with more on the way. Our medical marijuana states include anything from home grow and patient collectives to highly regulated state-run systems like we have in Pennsylvania, New York, Illinois, and New Jersey. Where we move from here, I think that we have an absolutely incredible potential with this plant, with its various chemical components, with the various cannabinoids, whether or not we isolate certain cannabinoids like CBD, cannabidiol, or whether we use whole plant medicine. I think that the future is definitely green, but we've absolutely got to get this rescheduled, get the DEA off of the researchers' backs so that we can produce the type of results that Dr. Saneto and other medical professionals need to be able to reliably tell patients that this is an acceptable and advisable medical treatment option. We're going to be taking questions after the next speaker. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Our last speaker on this topic this morning is Sebastien Cotte. Sebastien became involved with the UMDF after his son Jagger was diagnosed with Leigh disease in 2011. Sebastien serves as a UMDF ambassador for the state of Georgia and co-chairs the Atlanta Energy for Walk of Life. In 2013, Sebastien began his involvement in the medical marijuana movement while looking for new ways to help his son Jagger. He subsequently co-founded Georgia's Hope, the leadership parent group that is pushing for a comprehensive medical cannabis in Georgia. In 2015, Georgia legalized the possession of cannabis oil for 8 qualifying conditions, including mitochondrial disease. Today, that number is more, correct? Jagger was the inspiration for Georgia's becoming the first state in the country that specifically includes mitochondrial disease in its medical cannabis program. Sebastien is the National Business Education Director and a board member of the Flowering Hope Foundation, a non-for-profit that provides education and patient support for Haley's Hope Cantanol products. He is also on the board of advisors to MD Herb, the cannabis education website. In his free time, I don't know when that is at all. I follow him on Facebook and I never know what part of the country he's in. But in his free time, he's a guest host of the Cannabis political show on Millennium Growing Broadcast Network. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That's just a disclaimer saying I'm not a doctor, but I got a few slides, but honestly I'm not really sure how many of the slides I'm going to get through. They are in your handout, so if you want to look at them later and if you have any questions. We're also going to have a networking session tomorrow morning, so we'll be around. But I think more importantly, what I want to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit about the difference between cannabis and industrial hemp at the end and how to get a safe product, because that's important. But I mostly want to tell you guys a story. And I'm going to try not to get too emotional on this one, but when Jagger got, we found out he had Mito, and in 2011, we turned around to the UMDF, and we met Margaret, and we came to some meetings, and shortly after, well, a good 7 months of begging, but we were able to get in a trial, in a clinical trial. And that was all because of the UMDF, and that's really helped Jagger a lot. So I started coming to the Symoposium, and this is my 5th one now, and I think the reason I'm here is probably the same reason that most of you guys are here, is because of hope, because it's really hard to have a kid with Mito, and we need help, we need support, we're a huge family. I mean, I'm looking around the room, and so many of you guys here, and we help each other, and we like the UMDF to help us out, and we just give each other hope. And pretty much at the end of the day, all we have is hope. I mean, we don't have a cure yet, so all we can do is hope. And clinical trials and all those, medication that we can get on, like API and all those, that give us hope. And to us, to my family, medical cannabis is giving us hope. This disease is a terrible disease, and kids don't usually live very long. And Jagger was put on hospice when he was about a year old. And we went home, and we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know how long he was going to be with us. He was our first kid, and it was all new. Normally when new parents of a kid that is not supposed to live very long. So that's about one of the hardest things you can do. And, we're always looking around. I know all of you guys are just, Googling everything every day, everything you can hear. And in 2013, I was watching CNN, like a lot of people are getting into this medical cannabis movement, and I saw the weed documentary, and Dr. Saneto showed a picture of Charlotte Figgy, that little girl, and they say that cannabis stops her seizures, CBD oil. So I started looking into this, and I said, there might be something into it. Maybe if you can stop seizures, you can do more. Maybe it can help with something else. And I did a ton of research. And we created a group, and we tried to pass a bill in Georgia in 2014, but we failed. We couldn't do it. We couldn't pass a bill. So it was very disappointing. But what I did is I took a week vacation off work, and I said, I got to look into this. And I went to Colorado, and because I know Colorado is where there were many things going on. So I went to Colorado, and I looked around, and I talked to growers, I talked to doctors, I talked to patients, I talked to parents. And I'm like, there's something going on in Colorado. There's something that could maybe help. So I went back home, and I remember on the flight home, I said, I'm pretty sure we need to move to Colorado, but how am I going to sell my wife on this? And I said, sales is what I do. I mean, every job I ever had in my life, I've been selling something. So I said, if I can't even sell my wife to move to Colorado, and maybe I do need to get another job and another career. But she was very receptive, and she said, yeah, you did the research, and I think we should go. So we talked to our hospice team, and they were not in favor. They say, it's 50-50, Jagger's not going to make the trip, he's not going to survive. But he can't fly commercial anymore because he required too much oxygen, so we had to drive. But at this point, we didn't have a lot to lose, right? So we figured, hey, why not? Let's just go to Colorado and see what happens. So we talked to our jobs, and they were pretty supportive. We determined we'd be gone for about 3 months. So, in August 2014, I remember we packed the car, a little Nissan SUV, all the way to the roof. We even bought a box to put on top because we had so much stuff. And we started driving to Colorado. That was pretty much one of the worst weeks of my life. It took us 6 days to drive from Atlanta to Denver. We had to stop about every 3 or 4 hours because Jagger would be screaming so much that he was starting to stop breathing. Or we would run out of battery on the oxygen concentrator in the car. So we had to stop, spend the night in a hotel, be charged with the batteries, getting to relax. But we made it. We made it to Colorado. And shortly after we got to Colorado, we quickly did the paperwork to become medical cannabis patient. And we did. And on August 20th of 2014, we gave Jagger his very first dose of Hades Hope, which is a high CBD oil. And right away, I say within probably a day or two, we saw a little bit of difference. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough for us to notice. It was enough for us to say, there's something going on there. He was having better eye traction, he was looking at us, he was just happier, he was smiling. And we keep giving him cannabis, we tweak a little bit, we give CBD, THC, we did different things, but it was getting a little bit better. Everything was improving. And we ended up staying in Colorado for 13 months, so instead of 3 months, we had some pretty understanding bosses. But after 13 months, it was time to go back. In the meantime, we were able to pass a bill in Georgia, so we were able to have, we allowed to have the oil, but we're not allowed to buy it, which is a whole different story. So Jagger's been on cannabis for almost 3 years now. And what we've seen again is sort of undoctored evidence, it's not double blind, it's nothing like this. But all I can tell you is what he did for me, for my family, for my son. He reduced his seizures by 80%. He reduced his pain by probably 90%. He hasn't touched any oxy for 2 years. He's been off morphine for at least a year now. And just with cannabis, CBD, THC, he's using a wide range of cannabis. But, is that going to work for everybody? No, probably not. But what it gives us hope. And I think all of us in this room, is what we want. We want a little bit of hope. We want something that maybe can get us to hold on until we find a cure, until all those researchers next door are doing amazing work in finding a cure for us. So, again, it's not for everybody, but it's something that if you have the opportunity to try it, if you are in a legal state or you can get to a legal state, I think there's good benefits for it. But you do have to do your research, you have to know what you're using, you have to know what you're doing. But that's Jagger, in case you didn't know him, in the middle. And it's actually because to this day Georgia is still the only state that has mitochondrial disease as a qualifying condition. Jagger was the first legal mito patient in the country. And we have been trying to get mitochondrial disease added to a lot of states, but that's pretty challenging. It's pretty hard to add any condition to any states. But we're still trying to do that. And if you are doing any advocacy in your states, and you want to try to get mito added, I'd be more than happy to help you guys with anything. So just ask me, and I'll be happy to help. So pretty much that's my story. That's Jagger's story, and I just wanted to know that they are all out there. And like I said, I'm going to go to a slide. There's a lot of hope out there, and again, thanks to the UMDF for thinking outside the box, because I know it's still a controversial subject. And I know 2 years ago when Chuck and the team let us do the first talk on cannabis, that was pretty groundbreaking. And 2 years later we're here. I know some of you guys in this room are using it for you or for your kids. So we're getting there, but as actually again Dr. Saneto said before me, we need a lot more research. We need a lot more information, and the government is not helping us doing that, so hopefully that will change soon. But just a couple of things I want to talk to you guys about, because we touched on this a little bit, but that's very important, especially if you're experimenting, especially if you're just trying to go to a legal state or trying to get something for your kid. The difference between cannabis and industrial hemp. You will find out that there's products out there that are made from either one of them. Technically, those plants are very similar, they're related, they're cousins, pretty much. They're not, it's the same family of plant. Cannabis is usually, that's what you see over here on the left, it's usually grown for medical or recreational reasons, and it's usually grown, it can be grown indoor, it can be grown outdoor, and they use the female flowers only to make the oil. And industrial hemp, it's a taller, high-looking plant, and that's mostly used for fiber. It's one of the strongest fiber in the world. It's a plant that can do many things. You can make clothes, you can make paper out of it, you could help with deforestation, you could help with many things. So it's a great plant, but it's probably not a plant you want to get your medication from. Now, when it gets really confusing, it's that the government decided to confuse everybody. The government decided that if a plant could be cannabis or could be industrial hemp. If a plant has less than 0.3% of THC, that plant is going to be considered hemp under the Farm Bill. And it's a little bit more complicated than that. And if you want detailed information about this, talk to Patrick later, but pretty much it's a loophole that let people in this gray area ship product, CBD product, to anywhere in the country. What happens when you get a loophole like this is you're going to have some companies that are going to do their due diligence, they're going to get you some safe product. And then you have a lot of companies that don't really care, they just want to make a few dollars. And most companies are usually, they have good marketing, or they might have know a lot of people, but they might not have a good product. A lot of the time, most products come from China, and as Dr. Saneto said before, that can be very dangerous. So the main thing I would tell you if you want to try the oil out there is do your due diligence, do your research, know where the product comes from, and if it's coming from industrial hemp, I will be very leery of that, at least for the time being. One thing that is great about industrial hemp is what we call phytoremediation, and it's a way that the plant can pull the toxin off the ground. So after the Chernobyl nuclear incident back a long time ago, and Fukushima in Japan, the nuclear incident, they are putting hemp on the ground to clean the ground, because hemp is really good at getting all the toxin out. So that's a problem, because if you don't know where it's grown, you don't know how it's grown, then you could probably end up with a product that has a lot of toxin. This is why, with a couple of our patients, we developed this quick guideline, and that's what we finish on, just to know how you get a safe product. So, what is the ideal situation? I know you're not always going to be able to get, all that stuff, but as much as possible, know where your product comes from. If it's grown by somebody in Colorado, California, or whatever state, talk to the grower. If you can travel to the state, go and see the operation. If somebody doesn't want to show you their farm, that's a huge red flag. They shouldn't have anything to hide. Vertical integration is a key. If you can find a product with that, that just pretty much means that the grower is also the person that's going to do the extraction, that is also the person that is going to end up selling the finished product. That just means that less people have their hands on it, less things can go wrong. However, this is not legal in every state. In some states, the person that grows is not allowed to do the extraction, is not allowed to sell it. So that's not always possible. Know your product. How is it extracted? Is it with a CO2 which is solventless? Is it using butane? Is it using propane? That might not be so safe. So, just know where you come, how it's extracted. Know which kind of oil it's in. Is it if it's an oil you're using, is it safflower oil? Is it MCT oil? Maybe is it sesame oil? Maybe you're allergic to sesame oil. So just kind of know as a product. Then get some labs. That's probably one of the most important things. Get third-party labs. Know the potency of the product, which is what you need in order to be able to get dosing. You get microbial testing. It's a plant. You could have E. coli, you could have salmonella, you could have mold. So get microbial testing to make sure it's a clean product. If you worry about where it's being grown, get heavy metal testing to make sure that there's no heavy metal toxin from the ground. Know the price. Price varies very much, and cheaper is not always the worst, and higher price is not always the best quality. It also depends on the states. California, for example, is much more expensive than anywhere else for right now. So know the price, know what you're buying, and then finally know the law. Patrick talked a lot about that, but not every state is created equal. Something legal in Pennsylvania is not legal in Georgia. It's different what's is legal in Colorado. So know the law, know what you're getting, and then if there's any kind of registry, especially if you live in a recreational state. But if there's any kind of registry you can get for your kid or for yourself, do get on the registry. In Georgia, people are saying, well, we don't want to get on the registry because we can't buy the product. But you should still get on it, because if you were to get product somewhere and your doctor were to find out about it, or somebody else were to find out about it, you don't want child services showing up at your door, right? And you don't want to get in any trouble if you end up in the hospital when you're giving product to your kids. So if there's a registry in your state, get on the register. On the registry, it's usually not that expensive in most states. Just make sure you add as legal as you possibly can in your states. And again, that's vary from state to state. So. But anyway, those are just good ideas, guidelines of things you should look for if you want to get into this journey of trying medical cannabis for yourself or for your kid. And that is what I have. So we're probably going to take questions, and the other thing too is tomorrow morning we have a networking session in one of the networking rooms. I believe it's on the other side of the hotel. I think from like 9:30 to 11:30. We'll be there to answer questions. So if you have more, one-on-one question or very specific to your situation, please stop by. And I'm not sure if Dr. Saneto will be there, but I know Patrick and I will be there to answer your questions. But anyway, now we have about 30 minutes to take questions. So.
All right, the way this is going to work is if you raise your hand, we'll send one of our volunteers around so that everyone in the group can hear you. They'll bring a microphone, and I will make sure that the speaker is able to use this microphone to respond to you. So, who has a question?
Hi, I could probably follow my question. Where, I guess, in the lineup of cannabinoid products would you put Marinol, or is it sort of in a world of itself?
So Marinol is a THC analog. So it's THC, essentially. And it's manufactured, it's pure, it's legal. You can prescribe it. It's been used for pain control and cancer for multiple years. And it usually doesn't work very well. So there's a disconnect there, suggesting that it's not THC that's really doing the pain killing. It's probably something else within the marijuana plant that we just haven't figured it out yet. That would be my plan. I know at our institute, they'll do anything to stop pain in kids. And Marinol is hardly ever used in our institute. So, just my experience.
More questions?
Yeah, this is for Sebastien, and one of the slides that you have is talking about the indica versus the sativa.
Yes.
Can you kind of explain what that is?
Sure. Well, let's see, maybe I can find the slide very quick. Okay, this one. Well, maybe we start with this one here. Pretty much just different kind of the gender. Well, not gender. Different kind of cannabis plant. There's three main type of cannabis plant: the sativa, indica, and ruderalis. You can see them; they look a little bit different. That's kind of the way they used to be, and that's kind of the way that when this whole thing got started. Now, those days, with technology in improvement in growing and breeding and things like this, most of your plants are going to be hybrids, which are a mix of usually sativa and indica. So they might be like sativa dominant or indica dominant, but it's really rare to find pure indica or pure sativa anymore. But where they get different is already looking a little bit different. Usually, we say sativa is a day use strain, and indica is for night. Now, this is if you were looking at a pure plant. Now, what we're able to do by doing breeding is doing a hybrid. But as a general statement, if you want to use cannabis, like say in the morning before you go to work to function or something like that, you will look at something sativa dominant. And if you want something at night to relax, maybe go to sleep, you will try to look for something indica dominant. So that's kind of the difference.
Hi, I was wondering which states we expect next to legalize medical marijuana.
What do we have on the horizon? West Virginia. Did West Virginia just legalize?
I know Nevada just legalized, and they're going to have their first local shops
As far as the next states coming up to consider medical marijuana, West Virginia and Ohio just passed, and that was number 28 and 29, I believe. I'm trying to think of where there are active initiatives going on right now. Yeah, South Carolina is once again going, oh, and Florida just passed a medical marijuana law, and that might make Florida the 30th state. So I think we have 30 states, with Florida just having passed their medical marijuana law. Their medical marijuana law is going to be one of the more highly regulated laws that restricts things like home grow and has a more highly regulated system of licensed grows and processors similar to Pennsylvania. But other than that, I'm not sure what the next states are that are coming online. What's that? Go to normal.org, National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and you can see exactly where the legislative battlefields are taking place right now for both medicinal and recreational.
We've got lots of questions.
I have two questions, but they're short. The first one is with the registry, does that need to be done with the CBD oil? Because I thought that was legal across. And then my other question was, has anybody looked at this in terms of REM sleep being intruding into the daytime? Because my son with mitochondrial disease has just been diagnosed on top of this with narcolepsy, and nobody seems to know how the two connect.
I think that question needs to be answered by all three of y'all. So, Dr. Saneto.
Okay, so at least in our state, if you get admitted to our hospital because of federal regulations, the hospital would not administer, handle, store, but will steal your CBD extract. So what we do is you sign a release form that allows you to self-administer the CBD oil or whatever else you want to administer. And the hospital says that they're no longer responsible for any untoward reaction by that self-administered medication. So at least in my hospital, we do that up front. So when you come in, you sign this form, and you're kind of good to go. So that's what we do, at least in our hospital. And as far as narcolepsy, it depends if you have. Does he have the HLA genotype for narcolepsy? Okay, so you need to get that done, because 90% of narcoleptics have an HLA type. And then it's very well treated, at least we know the stuff to treat it with. And most patients do pretty well on the treatments. It is pretty much lifelong. And does he have the problems with when he gets emotional, does he collapse or anything?
He doesn't have advocacy, that's why I'm ruling that.
Oh, okay, so he doesn't have the full triad, but most narcoleptics don't.
I'm not convinced yet, even though they did the whole brain study and everything, the GAP study, I'm not convinced it's concerns more related to the disease.
Okay, but we see that all the time, and we do really well treating narcolepsy, actually. And we can keep them off during the day, so that's no problem.
Yeah.
And in fact, some of the treatments that we would use are frontal lobe stimulants, which don't act like Ritalin, so you get the dual effect. You get a drug that's not Ritalin that helps your son concentrate better and not fall asleep.
He takes 400 milligrams of Provigil every morning straight with his J-tube and falls back asleep.
Well, there's a new generation of Provigil that's a better med. It's just more expensive. So you just have to fight the insurance companies because they want to know that you failed, right? That's the only way you get the higher price meds if you fail the lower cost ones. Although it takes you 5 years to figure that out, and then you still get pre-auths all the time from the insurance company, which drives us crazy.
Thank you.
Do you want us to address the registry part of her question?
Oh, sorry.
Ma'am, you asked about a registry, and this is where I would follow up on what Sebastien said. Know the laws of your state, first and foremost. For example, in Pennsylvania, we passed a medical cannabis law that's not fully implemented yet. Adults do not have legal access to medical cannabis. An adult with a qualifying condition in Pennsylvania will still be prosecuted for misdemeanor possession of cannabis. However, we do have a safe harbor provision that allows parents or caregivers or guardians of critically ill children with a qualifying condition to register with the Department of Health and be legally permitted to possess medical cannabis products. Now, in Pennsylvania, that means that a Pennsylvania parent with a safe harbor letter could go to a state like Colorado and obtain an oil, a pill, a tincture, but not the actual plant material, because that's not what we define as a medical cannabis product. And that child would have to be on the Department of Health's registry so that there would be legal protections for the child, the parents, and the caregiver. Every state is different. So, specifically look at the laws in your state, whether or not it provides for some type of registry for children having these types of products. An excellent resource, again, that I just mentioned, that my wife reminded me of, is normal.org, NORML.org, and that will give you a good primer of state medical marijuana laws. And the other thing that I wanted to mention briefly about CBD oil is, yes, there is this exception in the Farm Bill that suggests that CBD or hemp products with 0.3% of THC or less are legal farm products. However, in December, the DEA announced that it considers CBD oil with any trace amount of THC in it whatsoever to be a Schedule I controlled substance. So far, they haven't done anything to act on that. But in my opinion, that means that products such as Charlotte's Web or Haley's Hope or Palmetto Harmony or any of these other CBD oils that are now being touted as legal CBD products and are being shipped throughout the country run the risk of DEA enforcement. So far, they haven't done anything to suggest that. But if you said to me, is this CBD product with minute trace THC, is that potentially a Schedule I controlled substance? I would tell you that the DEA considers it to be so. What they're going to do with that moving forward, I don't know.
Dr. Saneto, you said there's a product that has a high level of that's coming out that
You're talking about a high level of CBD versus THC?
Yeah. So the product that's coming out.
Oh, no, it's
seizures.
that is the GW Pharmaceutical Epidiolex product, and that's over a 200 to 1, and on testing has 0 THC levels that we can detect.
Okay, and when is that coming out?
It's got to be vetted by the FDA first, so we're probably talking 15 months.
Okay, and is that something that might be able to be prescribed off-label for Mito?
No, because we're sure almost that the FDA will say you can prescribe it for Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and you can prescribe it for Dravet syndrome.
Okay.
That's probably what's going to happen. We don't know.
Yeah.
And then they'll still keep it a Schedule 1. So unless you have a Schedule 1 license, which I can tell you that I had my golden retriever passed away, but technically the DEA was going to get the first pick of the litter if I get a Schedule 1 license quicker. I mean, that's a hard one. So it took me 2 years to get a Schedule 1 license. So unless your provider has a Schedule 1 license, which they're not probably going to have, they're not going to be able to prescribe it. And technically, federally, it'll be illegal. So that's how it'll probably be controlled at first. That's my guess. I don't know for sure, and that's for the legal experts.
And the product that's in California, what kind of level is that, do you know?
Well, the products that are available in medical marijuana states vary from extremely high THC to some that have, a 50-50 CBD to THC ratio. So, when you talk about the medical marijuana products that are available, literally it's going to vary widely from state to state in what those states permit. Some states are very restrictive and have restricted it to CBD products. Pennsylvania, for example, does not permit flower, does not permit the actual plant material to be sold. Michigan allows home grow with a patient permitted to legally grow up to 12 plants, or they could designate a caregiver, and a caregiver could grow up to 72 plants and then supply those plants to a dispensary for patients to purchase. What type of testing varies from state to state. So really, it comes down to what state are you in, what products are available, what type of regulations are available. These CBD oil products that I was talking about are available throughout the United States, but if the if the DEA cracked down on it, I believe that they would all be subject to seizure as a Schedule I controlled substance. Yeah.
We can't get anything comparable to this other product. Okay, thank you.
I don't know if the research is out there on this or not, but I was just wondering, as far as we know, is medical cannabis safe for people who have chronic kidney disease?
As far as we know, the answer would be yes, but you have to put "as far as we know" in quotation marks because it hasn't been well studied. But I can tell you that in all the patients thus far in the trial, and we've been doing the trial now for 2.5 years, we've had no complaints about renal function.
Very good, thank you so much.
Okay, everyone raise their hand that has a question because I feel like we're missing somebody that's had their hand up for a long time. Okay, I know this lady right here has had her hand up more than once. So here comes the microphone.
It's not really a question, but you guys mentioned that there's a networking event tomorrow morning, and I'm not in the family program schedule. Is that not for family members?
Yes, no, I think it's another page, like it's a yellow piece of paper that has all the networking event. It should be on that. Does anybody get a yellow piece of paper? Or just dreaming? Oh yeah. Yeah, somebody has, okay, I was like, I'm not dreaming, okay. So it should be 9:30 to 11:30, I think.
That's it.
All right, thank you.
It wasn't so much of a question as it is a statement. I know that, Georgia is the only state that has mitochondrial disease as a qualifying condition. I live in the state of Illinois, and I have qualified under fibromyalgia and interstitial cystitis. So there's a lot of people that are qualified under other conditions such as epilepsy. So just know that, with mitochondrial disease, obviously people have a lot of other comorbid, co-occurring conditions. So you may qualify in your state with another condition that you might have.
Yeah, that's a good point, and especially a lot of mito patients have seizures, and seizures is pretty much like the most qualifying condition in almost every state. So just because there's no mito in your state, you can still qualify usually in something else.
Okay, there's a gentleman back here.
Just curious if y'all have any experience with CBN and how that might apply to various medications.
My son takes it at night for sleep, and I'll say it's hit or miss. We've been using it for a while, and sometimes you feel like it's kind of relaxing him and helping him sleep, and some other nights it really doesn't do really much. So I think the jury's still out on it, but there are oil, you can get CBN oil out there. It's a little bit harder to find than CBD or THC, but usually people try to take that for sleep.
So it's more analogous to THC than Sebastien?
It's what?
More analogous to THC than CBD?
Well, CBN is technically THC, that is degraded THC with light and heat over time. So it's a THC byproduct, CBN. So it's mildly psychoactive, but it's you're in Colorado, so it's worth trying because it's easy for you to try. But in some other places, it might be really hard to get.
Just one thing real quick.
One thing that I want to add as we're talking about this is regardless of whether or not your state has a medical marijuana program, a safe harbor letter, a registry, transporting medical cannabis products from one state to another state is a direct violation of federal law. So do not think that it is legal to go to Colorado and get medical cannabis products and bring them back to your home state. That is absolutely a violation of federal law. If you have products mailed from Colorado to your home state, postal inspectors may seize your products. I don't think they're going to prosecute you, but they could. So that's something that you absolutely need to be mindful of, that everything that we're talking about here, it remains illegal under federal law. And we happen to have an administration and an attorney general that seems to think that medical cannabis is only slightly less bad than heroin. So we've got a lot of work to do on the federal level.
My question, more or less, it could be for anybody. Has anybody had any experience with cannabis oil with helping with dystonia?
So you didn't hear it from me, but yes. It's helpful.
Thank you.
So I do live in Colorado, and we have it recreationally, and we have medical marijuana as well. And I think one of the issues has been is that it is so differently regulated. I tell people I'm from Colorado, and they make a joke about how stoned everyone must be. And there are times I walk through Boulder and I really wonder how stoned everyone must be. But I think the issue is how, and these results here are poignant. And if we had these results as far as seizures go, under any other drug, people would be taking them much more seriously. How do you get this regulated across the board nationally? And it's almost like you have to do a campaign that medical marijuana is a solid drug. And how do you, it's almost like a brand awareness or something. How do you guys, as advocates, how do you look at changing that awareness?
Events like this. Every single opportunity we have to talk about medical cannabis and to talk about its efficacy in a manner that is receptive to the skeptics. It's one thing, I've been a cannabis reform activist for almost a decade, and that includes recreational reform, and that's something that we hope to move on to in Pennsylvania. But one thing that I did was, I think that early on I was able to build credibility with the people that I was talking to. If I was talking to legislators, if I was talking to law enforcement, if I was talking to judges or prosecutors, because I'm an attorney, because I am a former prosecutor myself. I was coming at it with maybe a different set of visuals than someone might have been anticipating. We still have people that when they hear medical cannabis, they think, deadheads in the park with frisbees, simply, claiming that they've got a sore back in order to get away with something. And we are chipping away at that stereotype. Every single state that embraces medical cannabis reform chips away at that stereotype. And most importantly, every state that embraces medical cannabis reform has elected representatives and senators whose obligation is to protect the citizens of that state. Your representatives in Colorado don't owe a damn thing to the Trump administration. They owe everything to Coloradans. The same with my legislators in Pennsylvania. Republican or Democrat, they represent me. And they do not represent the current attitude of the federal government. So the more that we move forward with this, the more that we build our allies, the more that we have the Sanjay Gupta CNN article, the more Charlotte Fiji's out there that the skeptics are able to see, the more states that embrace medical marijuana, that eventually, and I thought when we hit 26 states, we would have hit the tipping point of forcing some type of federal action on this. Clearly, we're not there yet, but this is not going away. For every one negative article about marijuana reform or medical cannabis, there's 100 that are in full support of it. There is a an emerging, very powerful medical cannabis and recreational cannabis lobby that is spending a lot of money in Washington. All of this combined is helping to bring us to the point where we're going to have some type of national referendum on this, because it is absolutely impossible to continue to maintain this legal in the state, illegal federally. What are banks going to do? What about products crossing state lines? It is untenable. And at least we were able to, push this at the state level and get reform at the state level, because if we were waiting for federal reform, not a single person in the United States of America would have access to medical cannabis. So thank goodness this was a state-led effort, but we've still got a lot of work to do.
Do we have any more questions? Well, I want to thank you all for coming. This was so interesting, and thank you for your questions. I do want to make a reminder to anyone that is a recipient of one of our scholarships to fill out the evaluation form and make sure your name is on it so we can accredit it to you. You have a choice to turn them in at the door or to bring them to the registration table. So again, thank you to you, and thank you to all of our speakers. It's very, very interesting.